Hello, everyone. My name is CJ Gossage. As you can probably guess by now, I'm a grad student at the Pine School. It's been an honor to be part of this. I thank Abigail and everyone else who was involved in putting this on. It's been a pleasure to hear from Dr. Kraus and all my colleagues, and I'm looking forward to hear the other papers this afternoon. But today I'm presenting my paper, 4Q175 as history, and I offer a new reading of 4Q175, which is a Dead Sea Scroll. But before I get to my thesis, I want to offer some background information on 4Q175. So to begin, let's examine the manuscript, which is pictured right here. 4Q175, or sometimes referred to as testimonia, is an excerpted text, meaning that it is composed of snippets of various other texts. Written in the 1st century BCE, testimonia contains 3 C-shaped hooks that connect each passage on the right-hand side of the manuscript. I don't know if you can see it from where you're positioned in the room. I guess you'll have to take my word from it or for it. But right here, and right here. Can you help me go back one slide? I'm sorry.
It's not working. Oh,
How do I reverse? Thank you. And those C hooks demonstrate that these texts were selected deliberately and are connected conceptually in some way, at least in the scribe's mind. 4Q175 is comprised of Exodus 20:21 from the Samaritan Pentateuch, Numbers 24:15 through 17, Deuteronomy 33:8 through 11, and an excerpt of what's called 4Q379, also from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Exodus 20:21 Samaritan Pentateuch is the equivalent of Deuteronomy 5:28 through 29 and Deuteronomy 18:18 through 19 in the MT. This text describes a future Mosaic prophet. In Numbers 24:15 through 17, Balaam prophesies of a star and a scepter. Moses celebrates the priesthood in Deuteronomy 33:8 through 11. And our excerpt from 4Q379 condemns the problematic Jerusalem cult. So let's examine the work of this scribe. Testimonia's scribe likely also wrote 4Q53, an excerpted text of Samuel, 1QS, the community rule, 1QSA, the rule of the congregation, 1QSB, the rule of the blessing, and corrections to 1Q Isaiah A, a very well-known Dead Sea Scroll. Also, Crawford adds to the scribe's resume 4Q481b, which is a fragmentary narrative text, and portions of the Habakkuk Pesher. This scribe was clearly aware of the vast array of Qumran traditions and texts. Also important for our thesis, which I will get to in a moment, Tikaklar and Cross describe testimonia as a personal use document, an autograph written in sloppy fashion. Now, the secondary literature is more or less settled. 4Q175 appears to be an anthology of messianic proof texts. Of course, I find this problematic, and that's why I'm giving you a paper today. The first 2 texts could most certainly be described as messianic. Exodus 20:21 SP concerns a Mosaic prophet, and Numbers 24:15 through 17 prophesies of a star and a scepter, who are considered messianic figures in other Dead Sea Scrolls. However, Deuteronomy 33:8 through 11 and 4Q379 are not really that messianic. Deuteronomy 33 is about priests, or Deuteronomy 33:8 through 11 is about priests, and 4Q379, or at least our portion, polemicizes the dysfunctional cult. Even more, if the goal of testimonia were to present various messiahs, one may have expected 4Q379 to come first, to present the dysfunctional cult as a problem to be solved, followed by the 3 supposed messianic texts offering messianic solutions to that dysfunctional cult. I thank Dr. Campen for this insight in my final term paper. Additionally, Eva Mrazchek, who we've already heard about today from Dr. Kraus, has argued that destruction or authority could just as easily summarize these 4 texts as well as or better than messianism can. Mrazchek does not posit a theme for 4Q175, but notes that it is a self-contained and specific composition, a logical instructional composition. Now, we have already noted that our scribe copied multiple texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls. What more can be said about our scribe's erudition, his virtuosity that enabled him to craft the careful composition that I will describe momentarily? Likely our scribe, like most of his contemporaries, was obsessed with scripture and possessed extraordinary command of its contents. This is from Dr. David Andrew Teeter. Additionally, textual rewriting, the unmarked reproduction and modification of existing texts, was pervasive among Jewish literature and the Dead Sea Scrolls in particular, according to Molly Zahn, who we've also heard from Dr. Krauss this morning. On this understanding, testimonia, as a personal jot pad intended for a larger composition, was but a middle point in the process of creating rewritten composition. If that's unclear, I'll return to it in a second. Mroz notes that this scribe, as typical of others, simply selected bits and pieces, quote unquote, of their literary heritage to craft a new composition, since scribes conceived of their literary heritage as a database or compendia or reference works. Finally, Steudel comes really close to my thesis, describing testimony as a kind of preparation notes for a discussion or for an eschatological commentary, but she doesn't go into detail. All right, CJ, you can finally get to the thesis now. What is my thesis? Well, recognizing the erudition of ancient Jewish scribes and the weakness of the so-called messianic anthology interpretation, my thesis is really simple. Testimonia's four texts contain a linear logic. Testimonia was intended to frame a historically minded midrashic composition. Here's my thesis in graphic form. On the top row are the various texts with the keywords to represent each text's significance or content. And below each text is a description of its contribution to the linear logic of testimonia as I see it. So Exodus 20:21, Samaritan Pentateuch, instilled a hope in a future Mosaic prophet. Numbers 24:15 through 17 has Balaam functioning as that Mosaic prophet who prophesies of a star and a scepter, who would become central to the Yakad self-understanding. With the star emerging as the teacher of righteousness, often considered the founding figure of the Yakad, Deuteronomy 33:8 through 11 authorizes the priests as the leaders of the Yakad until the scepter emerges. Balaam's prophecy is partially corroborated with the emergence of the star, that's the teacher of righteousness. But the prophecy's full or complete fulfillment is held in abeyance until the arrival of the scepter. Finally, 4Q379 criticizes the Jerusalem cult, effectively encouraging the Yakad to remain steadfast under priestly authority until the scepter's arrival. So let's go through each text individually. So beginning with Exodus 20:21 from the Samaritan Pentateuch, this is virtually identical to the MT of Deuteronomy 5:28 through 29 and 18:18 through 19 combined. Deuteronomy 5 is underlined and Deuteronomy 18 is bolded in the translation I have off to the right. If Testimonia were merely an anthology of messianic proof texts, Deuteronomy 18 alone would have sufficed. Whereas Exodus 20:21 SP, with the inclusion of Deuteronomy 5, that is the underlined portion, would contain superfluous material. It's not really messianic. On my reading, we can make sense of our scribe's selection of Exodus 20:21 SP, the only use in the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have. This text specifically facilitates the linear chronology between the Mosaic prophecy here in Exodus that occurred at Sinai, according to the Samaritan Pentateuch, and Balaam's prophecy in Numbers 24:15 through 17, much later in the Torah. So here's a fun little graphic that I'll return to throughout the presentation. The first text, a Mosaic prophet is promised. In the second text, Numbers 24:15 through 17, a or the Mosaic prophet prophesies. Numbers 24:15 through 17, our second text. In this text, Balaam functions as the Mosaic prophet promised in the first text. Balaam's portrayal is thoroughly Mosaic. I have one example for you that'll be most pertinent. In Exodus 20:21, Samaritan Pentateuch, Adonai promises to place my words in his mouth, that is, in the Mosaic prophet's mouth. 3 times, Numbers 23:12, 23:26, and 24:13, Balaam insists that he can only speak the words that Adonai gives him. In Exodus 20:21 SP, Adonai encourages his followers to heed the Mosaic prophet. Numbers 24 tells them what should be heeded, Balaam's prophecy concerning the star and the scepter. Again, the star represents the teacher of righteousness according to the Yakad, and the scepter represents the Davidic Messiah. Again, both figures are central to the Yakad self-concept. Remember, Testimonia was likely written in the late 1st century BCE, and the teacher of righteousness had already emerged and perhaps passed away, and now the community awaits the scepter. Back to my fun graphic. A Mosaic prophet is promised in the first text. In the second text, a or the Mosaic prophet prophesies. And then in our third text, priestly authority is assumed. So Deuteronomy 33, 8 through 11, our third text, falls among Deuteronomy 31 through 34, which Eckhart Otto calls Deuteronomy's prophetic finale. Deuteronomy 33, 8 through 11 assumes priestly ascendancy after the return from exile, as described in Deuteronomy 32 and 33. Deuteronomy 33, 8 through 11, I suggest, preserves this context. Per Deuteronomy 33, 8 through 11, the Yakad is to give Levi your Thummim and Ummim, representing oracular and interpretive authority. The mention of Massa and Meribah corroborates Adonai's divine selection of the Yakad's priestly leaders. The Yakad's priests have supposedly kept your commands and guarded your covenant. Incense and whole burnt offerings in Deuteronomy 33 reminds us how Qumran ideology has replaced them with deeds and prayers. Deuteronomy 33, 8 through 11 assumes the Yakad's priests quasi-permanent authority with the clause, his adversaries will not rise again. All right, back to this. In our first text, a Mosaic prophet is promised. In the second text, the Mosaic prophet prophesies. In the third text, priestly authority is assumed. And in the fourth text, the cult is criticized. In 4Q379, Joshua 6:26's curse regarding the rebuilding of Jericho is transformed into a prophecy concerning Jerusalem's cult. Line 22 omits Jericho, unlike the MT. Line 30 mentions Jerusalem explicitly, demonstrating how Joshua's curse has been rewritten according to the Yakad's circumstances. Line 23 mentions foundations and gates, as in Joshua 6:26, but line 29 of 4Q379 mentions rampart and district, elements that describe Jerusalem in the temple scroll. The logic of this fourth text is simple. The Yakad is divinely ordained over against the Jerusalem cult, which is ripe for judgment, according to 4Q379's rewriting of Joshua 6:26. Testimonious scribe essentially says, hey, endure in the Yakad and don't return to Jerusalem. Now, I believe 4Q174, another Dead Sea Scroll, is analogous to how I understand Testimonia would have looked if its scribe had the opportunity to flesh out the ideas on his so-called personal jot pad, quote unquote. 4Q174 and Testimonia each are structured by four principal texts. I've already offered those for Testimonia, but for 4Q174, they are 2 Samuel 7, Psalm 1, Psalm 2, and Deuteronomy 33. There is a linear trajectory in each composition. I've been arguing for that with Testimonia, and with 4Q174, it's as follows. 2 Samuel 7 describes an eschatological temple for those who hold fast to the Yakad's teaching. Those who hold fast are described using Psalm 1, those who delight in the law. Psalm 2 suggests the Yakad will suffer a future time of refining, or judgment, or persecution, whatever you'd like to put in. Finally, Deuteronomy 33 offers a general blessing over the community. As you can also see by my sophisticated highlighting, Deuteronomy 33 is a principal text for each composition. Even more, the scepter is mentioned in Numbers 24, 15 through 17 in Testimonia, and in the context of the future temple in 2 Samuel 7 and 4Q174. So again, 4Q174 demonstrates how Testimonia may have looked if our scribe had finished the hypothetical larger composition I'm imagining. So again, Balaam in our second text functioned in the capacity of a Mosaic prophet, as described in our first text. He prophesies of the star and the scepter. The star, the teacher of righteousness, has emerged, and until the scepter arrives, the priests, from our third text, function authoritatively as the Yakad avoids the wayward Jerusalem cult, our fourth text. In conclusion, Testimonia demonstrates how the Yakad conceived of itself as the telos of Israel's salvation history. That, in this case, began with Moses and will conclude with the arrival of the Messianic scepter. Thank you. Might to take questions now. Okay. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
I've got a simple one. I think I'll lose some face, but I learned something. The Yakad is the proposed.
I didn't know what that is.
The community from Qumran who supposedly owned the Qumran schools. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
What's the significance of Balaam? Like, why would he be merited or have that position?
That's a great question. I am not sure what the significance of him being the one to utter this prophecy. Uh, all I know is that this prophecy in particular is given a lot of airplay at Qumran because of its messianic implications. So it gives a lot of raw materials to do this sort of thing with. So, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Right, so I'm asked about what Yachad, which means together in Hebrew. So what is the arrival of the Messianic scepter? How, for people who are not familiar with that, what is that supposed to, is that a person? Is that object? A person carrying an object?
Yeah, so she asked, what is the significance of the arrival of the scepter? And the scepter, at least in that prophecy of Balaam, he prophesies of a star and a scepter. The scepter is usually associated with kingly rule, or at least that's the way it's taken up later on. And it comes to represent the Davidic Messiah at Qumran in a variety of texts. One of which I'm saying, this is why that text is here, is the scepter. They're by evoking this text, they're imagining the arrival of this Davidic Messiah.
So by your analysis of the scroll from the Dead Sea, southern Jerusalem, had to gone over there, you're kind of helping us understand more of the mindset of the people who were writing these scrolls. Can I say that, or is that too much of a leap?
No, I think that's fine in broad strokes. I think if I were to be very specific or maybe refine it slightly, I would say I am positing a potential reason why this scribe wrote this text. And I think even if I said any more than that, I might be uncomfortable. I think that's as far as my thesis. That's as far as I was willing to go in my thesis. And even that is obviously conjectural because I can't get in his head. But I'm just trying to understand the logic of these four texts being jammed together. But yes, sir.
So I have a question about the fragment itself.
Yeah.
So is that a panel of a scroll? Or is it, you know, it looks like it's a page of a codex, but they didn't use the codex form
So
that early, to my knowledge.
So I use the language of jotpad, which is a direct quote from a scholar. Notes,
Right.
a personal notepad, because it's also folded down the middle, which makes them wonder, oh, was this, you know, this was for keeping on your person or something like this. It was written sloppily compared to this scribal hand elsewhere, which then makes these scribes or these scholars say, well, if this scholar wrote all of these deluxe manuscripts elsewhere, the well-known Qumran scrolls, and this one is very sloppy, folded in half, seems to be an autograph with these notation marks on the side. This must be a single copy, which wasn't intended to be part of anything else, but it was intended to frame what I'm calling a larger composition. I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of got lost as I was answering, but
no, it does. What it means is that the size of the fragment is simply that's
it.
That's what he was using.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Yes, sir. Yeah. Julia, and then go ahead, Dr. Campen. Okay. Go ahead, Julia.
Like, it's such a weird prophet to have to, like, I mean, like, he gets his like a couple chapters later in Numbers in the original text, right? So like, is the use of Balaam in your manuscript like because he's using messianic language that's incredibly useful for the community?
Exactly.
Or is it because he's like kind of an OG, like Deir al-Bala, he's mentioned too in an inscription outside of, like, does that like, so I think he might have been, is there some speculation that he's like, well, maybe a little bit well known as a prophet based on that inscription?
So Julia's question was similar to Abigail's a little bit ago. Again, why are they using Balaam's oracle when later on in Numbers he is criticized very strongly? Yeah. So as Dr. Saracen says, the easy answer is that this Numbers 24 is a positive tradition of Balaam, and the later one is a negative tradition. But I think I would just give your comment. Right. I think I would just give your answer, Julia, which you already answered the question, which is, well, it's just useful. for them to do what they want to do, which is talk about Messiah stuff.
I'm wondering if like social capital as a profit was important to the community, or if it's just the thing that he's using and it didn't matter whose mouth it came out of.
I would say probably the former. It's just the fact that he wrote it down and it's useful. I'm Dr. Campen.
I was curious about the connection with 4Q 174, which in the case of 4Q 174, you have a very specific interpretive technique operating in that text, as opposed to this particular collection of texts.
Yeah.
And so what could you expand on the rationale for why one jumps to connect the two texts?
Yeah, sure. So Dr. Campen is questioning perhaps my hasty comparison between 4Q174 and 4Q175. I'm not posing a genetic relationship or that they had the same scribal group, that they were working on similar compositions. I just felt like it was a useful example of something else that looked like what I'm envisioning, to show that I'm not positing something crazy, but that there is something similar or analogous elsewhere in the scrolls. So I agree with you. I don't know if you can pose anything more than that. It just felt like a helpful analogy or a helpful example.
But I guess my point is that the interpretive techniques used in these texts are multiple. There's multiple ways which the interpretive tradition works here, and so to jump too hastily to connect it to one would demand some evidence.
Fair enough. Then maybe you and I can meet up after this and we can talk about that. I would appreciate your insight for sure. Yes, sir, Dr. Krause.
So I was curious, it was great that you brought up specific examples of the text, and you said they're excerpted. So I was curious, excerpted from what? And maybe also related to Julia's point too, that maybe they weren't necessarily reading Balaam as part of, the book of Numbers, just this particular oracle of Balaam.
Yeah, so I guess this is sort of getting at your question earlier, or part of your presentation, which when did scripture become scripture and become a thing from which something can be excerpted? I'm assuming, I guess just because it's easy perhaps, that when it's Balaam, Numbers 24:15-17, and we find that in the other traditions that it simply just was excerpted from Numbers. Same thing with Exodus 20:21 SP. It's almost identical to the other Exodus 20:21 SP scrolls that we have at Qumran. Same with the other texts. 4Q379 is a little bit more controversial because some people want to argue that 4Q379 came after this text, that this text was sort of the motivator to create all of those texts. I think that's the more difficult thing to argue. I would argue the reverse. It's still an excerpted text taken from 4Q379. So it's excerpted insofar as there are larger compositions elsewhere in the Qumran scrolls that have these texts in their own composition, and then they were simply culled and put together into this text. Same thing with 4Q174. All of those texts that 4Q174 uses are found elsewhere, and they were just simply pulled together and then, of course, commented upon in 4Q174, but they were still taken from existing texts.
So do you think that's what like Zahn and Roth's thing, that they're just taking, different texts from here, there? Some of them are the biblical texts, some of them are the Samaritan Pentateuch, some of them are other scrolls or texts preserved in Qumran, and they're all kind of at the same level.
Yeah, I agree with part of your point earlier that you said, at what point did scripture become scripture? This is Molly Zahn and this is Eva Morazchek and Hindi Najman. It's like at a certain point, the text became scripture, but before that, there was a much larger body of authoritative text to pull things from and to excerpt from. And that's why you have 4Q379 and Exodus 20:21 SP, as opposed to Deuteronomy 5 and Deuteronomy 18 from the MTs, because the Samaritan Pentateuch was just as relevant or more useful in this case at Qumran than would the MT have been. Yes, ma'am. Hara.
How much of the text that you studied and is going to take from other extra?
I mean, how many texts from Qumran or from the Dead Sea Scrolls take from extra biblical texts or are extra biblical texts? I don't know well, let me answer that second one first. The first one I'm not gonna be able to give a good answer, but the second one is the answer to the second question is there are other Dead Sea Scrolls, Damascus document 1QS 4Q174, Testimonia, and I'm sure there's others that I'm not remembering, that reference star and scepter as a significant text for them to then be able to elaborate on their messianic expectations. As for the extra biblical texts that are extra biblical at Qumran, there's a lot of them. I don't have a percentage, but that is a significant portion of the Dead Sea Scrolls are texts that later on would not be biblical or that we would consider not biblical, but they clearly found them important.
There's other extra biblical texts that they also consider.
Yeah, I mean, Jubilees is one that for them was important. Enoch, all the Enoch traditions were very important for them. And I don't know if there's anyone in this room who's part of Christian traditions that still hold those as canonical or that hold those as canonical. There are Christian traditions that do, but most Christian traditions do not. But that might be a good example. Yes, Abigail.
One more question. Back on the star and scepter, I just kind of came to mind that the Esther story is leading Esther's star, and then there's also that significant like scepter theme when the king Ahasuerus holds out the scepter to her. Is it like it? No.
I don't know. You might be right. I don't.
Like when she goes before him to like get permission to invite him to the party, like
right.
the way that it's kind of proclaimed that she is now like a person that he wants to speak with is that he extends the scepter to her.
Right.
I'm just wondering, like, is the star and scepter thing, does it come up in lots of other contexts, or is it just?
I don't know. That's fun either way, though. I've never thought of that before. I don't know, though. Yeah.
I mean, not just in Qumran or that area, scepter as royal authority is a very broad religious concept throughout the entire Mediterranean basin and the Middle East.
So I'm saying, I'm imagining that there's probably other, Babylonian traditions or whatever, where there's also lots of prophecies about stars and scepters. And
yeah.
Sure. Dr. Kalman has one more question.
We may be asking the wrong question. I'm not sure following up. And there's a distinct figure for them.
Right.
I mean, even later the rabbinic literature, Balaam, Job, Jethro, all get various prophecies.
Good and bad, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think Balaam standing where we stand looks like a distinct figure in some way.
It's the content realm.
I'm just not sure if he is in Qumran literature. Yes. Right? It's just another prophet.
Thanks again.